like I start talking and then like it gets cut off when you start. All right, I'm going to go now. Let's see if it works. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the next chapter. I'm your host, Christopher Navo. As always, this is our second episode of a brand new series I've started called Authors Alcove. It's getting a bunch of fantastic writers together to talk about just different topics about what made them get into writing and things that they're just passionate about doing. So I ask my guest members, which I'll have introduced to them shortly here, what the topic they'd like to approach. And they all came together and decided on the topic, introducing a character. But we'll discuss general stuff as well, too. So just real quick, I want to introduce my guests. I have MJ Kuhn, is it?
Yep. Yeah, like raccoon.
Okay, raccoon. Okay. And then I have Sam Paisley and then Adrian Gibson with us today. So I just want to go around the table because this is your guys' chat. Just maybe talk about what got you started in writing, what you've currently published, what maybe is not published, and just go from there. And MJ, if you want to take it off, it's all you.
Kick us off.
Go raccoon, go.
Right? Go raccoon. Hi, I'm MJ Kuhn. I'm one half of SFF Addicts for co-hosting with Adrian, which I guess is that are you in the same position? Okay, you're underneath.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like Zoom where you're all in different spots. But yeah, so I'm also an author, which is why I'm on Authors Alcove. So my books are Among Thieves and Thick as Thieves that are both out right now from Saga Press. And then I also have the Ultimate SFF Story Bible. Among Thieves. This is one I put out this year, which is it's a guided journal for building characters and getting started with writing. So that's who I am. And then what was the other question? What got me into writing?
Yeah, just when did you start? Maybe what just kind of made it go forward for you?
Yeah, so I've been writing forever, but also I got into my first corporate job and I went, can I swear on this show? No.
Sure. Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
And I went,
I don't make a lot of money here, so.
Not brand saver. Sponsors are gonna have a fit.
But yeah, I got into it a little bit in my first day job, which I still have a day job, so I haven't gotten out of that yet. But I was like, no, I want to write stuff. So that's when I started writing seriously, and that was about 10 years ago. And now I still have a day job. But there you go. That's me.
Awesome. Sam or Adrian? We can
go for it, Sam.
This way.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Sam Paisley. Unfortunately, I'm not any half of the SFF Addicts Podcast, but at least I'm friends with them, so that's good news. But I am the author of the Elements of Times. There we go. It actually showed series. Book 1, The Winds of Change, is out. And then obviously, as it is part of a series, I'm working on the rest of it. It's a trilogy, so books 2 and 3. There it is. I suppose I'll announce this now, but as far as what's going to be published, have a novella, a prequel novella that will be launched with a Kickstarter in the coming weeks that Adrian actually helped me quite a bit on the interior design. So special thank you to Adrian. And some other surprises in that Kickstarter too, and I'll start publicizing it and all that kind of stuff very, very shortly for anyone who's read the series or is interested in the series or wants to check it out. What got me into writing, or why I started writing, I went to business school for university and hated it and always wanted a creative outlet. And I was considering going into film and decided that the practical side of my side of my mind told me I should probably not pursue that, but make it a passion and a hobby. So I started writing. And the other flip side of that is I wanted to learn how to speak better and articulate my thoughts better. And I figured writing would be a good way to do that as well. So both those are longer stories, but essentially wrote the biggest piece of garbage you'll never read in about a month, and that eventually, after about 10 years, turned into the book that you were holding before, Christopher. So that's the short version of my story.
Very cool.
I guess
Adrian.
it's my turn.
It is.
Yeah, so I'm Adrian M. Gibson. MJ already mentioned she is on the top. So yeah, we're co-hosts of SFF Addicts Podcast, which is over on FanFi Addict and all those wonderful podcast apps. But that's probably where most people know me from. But then also I'm the author of Mushroom Blues, which is my debut novel. And people have probably seen a lot of just like crazy fungal shit over the last few months from my end. Everyone's got a coffee. It's like the Oprah of books. It's wonderful.
Here we go. You get one, and you get one.
But that's my debut novel. I self-published it back in March, and yeah, I'm just very, very excited to have my book out in the world finally. It feels really crazy, but I feel fantastic about it because this has been a journey that's taken me quite a long time. I did a lot of like fan comics and stuff like that when I was younger because I'm also an illustrator. So I combined illustration with writing and never wrote fan fiction, but wrote fan comics, just like binders and binders full of them. Yes, Daniel, my spores are indeed scattered across the world. But that journey kind of kept cropping up here and there. Like I studied English literature in university, and I tried my hand at writing then and into my 20s and realized like I'm really good at making up ideas, but I'm really terrible at following through with them to any kind of like decent conclusion. And it wasn't until my first son was born that I decided I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to start taking writing more seriously. And I used the podcast as a way for me to learn as much as I could about writing craft and genre and theme and characterization, all these different aspects of writing in a professional manner that was free and very, very subtly selfish. But that's just, that was like the right mode because I was a stay-at-home dad, still am, and I needed to like put my creative mind towards something bigger that I'd never done before, and also felt like I could utilize my skills outside of the monotony of parenting, as beautiful as parenting
and
is.
Talk to other adults.
And
I would
talk to other
imagine that
adults,
was a
yeah.
draw.
No, we've talked about this before as well, MJ. It's like I get so much of my socialization from doing the podcast, and so becoming part of this community, immersing myself with other writers, all the different kind of stuff, allowed me to be like a functioning adult, but also put my creativity to work.
Very cool. Very cool. And I've been following your little book growth journey, so to speak, literally.
The literal growth and
on Twitter, and just watching your mushroom book just bloom. It's crazy.
Thank you, man. Thank you. And the other ones that I literally grew and then ate. But yes.
Yeah, the mushrooms you grew on your book. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and Sam, I feel good because I know it took you 10 years for you to write that, and I think I'm in 12 years. I mean, granted, I'm not writing all the time, but it's I get that for sure. Awesome, guys. Well, as I mentioned, you guys picked a topic about talking about character, and I kind of wanted to dig into some of the character work you guys have. It looks like most of you are taking on kind of multiple POVs in your books. Adrian, you actually did also a first person with your main character, excuse me, Henrietta. And so I'll be very curious on how the approach for each of you was on this particular thing. So I guess, again, going around, what were some of your inspirations for when you were creating these POVs for yourselves? Were they people in your real life? Were they maybe somebody you saw on TV, movie? Where did it all start for origin on your characters?
Yeah, so I feel like I get asked a lot by people whether my characters are inspired by real people. And I know that there's people that do that. I can't do that as a writer. Like I've tried to create a character like using a person I actually know as the base template. But the problem is I always get stuck because I don't know a soul alive as well as I know my characters and need to know my characters in order to write them. And I know I could
it can also get super messy if someone's
Yeah.
like, that feels a little familiar.
Well, okay, yeah, that's fair. I didn't even think about that. Having someone like read it and be like, is this based on me? Be like, no. But yeah, so no, it's hard to explain where my characters come from because like I do feel like they spring into being like kind of somewhat fully formed in my head. I know that's not true, but like it feels that way a little bit. Like I'm Athena birthing my children from the brain or whatever. But but yeah, no, I also just like to say I just kind of take my own personality flaws and just like hand them out like little party favors to all my characters. So it's like, you get my abandonment issues, you get my social anxiety. Here you go, all of you get a present. So I don't know, that's where they start a lot of the time too.
MJ, I actually do that a lot too, where it feels you're like a fucking fairy, just like sprinkling magical dust. But it's actually
except
like
for
all of
curses.
it's all of your like flaws.
Like, here's all the things that are wrong with me. Now they're wrong with you. Enjoy.
Exactly. Obviously, like a lot of them you can embellish and whatnot. It's like you're taking aspects of yourself. Like I don't think any one character that I've ever created is like a perfect reflection of me, but a lot of them sort of imbue traits of my personality or my experiences and whatnot. Like like MJ, a lot of my characters just kind of become what they are. I think the actual act of storytelling, creating an outline, writing a first draft, revision, every one of those stages is an opportunity for a character to show you something new about themselves as if they're a living being. And for me, so many of my characters feel like living beings where, like Henrietta, the main character in Mushroom Blues, she started out as a man, as like most noir, murder mysteries, police procedurals
Hard-boiled detective.
tend to have like the gruff male character as the lead. And once I started to write that character, it just felt off, and so I changed it to a woman, and it just started to vibe a little bit more. Originally it was third person, sort of like closed POV, like very, very intimate POV, but still it didn't work. And then I changed it to first person, and that's when everything started to click, where it was like first person allowed me to get inside her head in such a way where I was able to explore the differences between her external experiences and her internal experiences, and the contrast between the two, where she's portraying herself outwardly differently than she's feeling about herself inwardly. So it really presented a lot of good opportunities for characterization through that choice of narrative POV sort of style. So it's like first person was what ended up working there. But a lot of the other characters, it's like Koji Nameko, who's a fan favorite. Thank you, Aaron. Koji Nameko, he was actually the first character that I created. Like I drew him here. He's a character in the book that I wrote before Mushroom Blues, but I chose to publish Mushroom Blues first, and then I'm gonna rework that other one and release it next. But he developed in much very same way, where it's like I had to write him in order to understand him. And through that writing process, it was allowing me to get inside the character's head, but also giving the character opportunities to surprise me with things that I'd never thought about that they could do, or ways that they would think, or ways that they would approach situations. It's kind of like giving them an opportunity at life. And that tends to be like the most natural and the most fun stuff. Yes, it will get an audiobook. It's coming out in the fall. I have not announced my narrator, but I do have the contract signed, and she's going to get back to me soon with samples. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, I think it's just like, of course she started out. Pay attention, Daniel.
He's
But
like, I missed that chapter, but okay.
She didn't start out in the finished book. She started out in my writing process. But I think giving your characters the flexibility to live and breathe separate from your own intentions as a creator, those are the moments where characters tend to flourish, at least for me.
Awesome.
I think on my end, anyone who reads Elements of Time, who knows me personally, is like, oh, this character is just you. But then it's like 12 different characters that they're talking about. So I don't think you can get away from, I mean, at the end of the day, you're, not to get too philosophical, but we're physically and metaphysically bound by writing what we know, because that's the only perspective through which you, like, that's all you can do. So you're going to have some of your voice in every character. What I really tried to do, as I developed the craft of storytelling over a decade of practice and, 1.5 million words for this one book to come out, what is try to isolate, I guess, the theme within the book and the story that I'm trying to tell as a whole, and have the character, the main character or characters, reflect that as much as possible. And then with their traits, like if you take the two main characters, Cooper and Reed, what I try to do with any character really is say, hey, what is this person's best trait? So let's take Cooper as a main example. He's very lighthearted, he's very playful, incredibly loyal friend. What does that look like if you take it to its absolutely most extreme, and how can that hurt him? Maybe he's too loyal and is willing to put himself in danger when he shouldn't, and he should, think before he acts more, or whatever the case is. And then have all of the characters be foils around, I mean, in this instance, it would be Cooper and Reed, around what that main character is and what their journey is. And so for me, characters start developing organically, where if I'm introducing someone or a new character, it kind of all morphs around that main idea. And then similar with the character traits, I try to take them to the logical extreme on any end as I'm creating the character. Similar to what Adrian said, though, like the characters will often show you what they do as you write something. You're like, oh, I didn't think that would be how this person reacts, but that makes sense. I do have inspirations for some of my characters. So the main mentor character, who I won't name because there's a lot of twists and turns in my book, but is a combination of like Teal'c from Stargate SG-1 with like a Dumbledore / Obi-Wan Kenobi, and really try to write with that voice. And I'm not an old wizened man mentor who's lived for hundreds of years, but let me try to get into that zone.
So you want us to think you're secretly immortal. We all know it. Right?
And there are a lot of inspirations, even between my two mains, Cooper and Reed, from shows like Supernatural. Like I really, really loved the brother dynamic. It is. I think I did a good job with it, but it's hard to know for sure. So I unabashedly wear my references on my sleeve in my writing. A lot of my chapter titles are like Eye of the Tiger, Let's Hear It for the Boy, just like songs that have been training montages.
It's like an 80s
Yeah.
80s film montage in chapter header form. And I know because I've gone through your whole guide.
Adrian helped me do a special edition, and he's just reading all of basically the playlist for the entire book is the chapter.
Dude, you have to make a playlist at this point.
Yeah, I likely will. I'm such a Luddite. I don't even have Spotify or anything, but that's definitely something I should release. Look for that in the Kickstarter. I'll add it as a bonus.
Get that shit done quick so I can put a QR code in the back of the book.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, I think, for me, I try to follow John Truby's Anatomy of a Story is something I talk about a lot. It's a book that had a really big impact on me, and he talks about character development and how each character should be a foil onto the main character in the theme. So I try to do that, and then the characters then develop as you write more. And what I find also is I eventually get to the point of saying, this character wouldn't do that, or what would this character do? And you kind of ask yourself the question, and then the character kind of answers it for you.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool when you can like have the characters interacting with each other. It's like, think about like characters as the solar system, but like you're viewing it on like an elliptical plane where it's like you have the sun in the center, and then you have, those are probably like your main POVs, and then you have all of the orbiting characters around it, and the ways in which they interact with each other is like the gravitational pull. Everything is pulled towards those main characters. And you know, I think it's really important to have this is something that's really bothered me when it comes to like films, TV shows, books, is when a side character appears and you're like, it's so obvious that this character hasn't been given a life outside of this scene or outside of the particular scenes, where it's like you feel like you exist just for this purpose. And to me, that feels like robbing that character of so much, because some of the best characters that I created for Mushroom Blues came out of nowhere, really surprised me. Some of them even appeared in like the second draft. And those characters, it's like I paid attention to ways in which I could give them as much life as possible, to be like, this person has a past, they have the present where they're in this very scene, and they have potentials for a future. And so it's like every character deserves that, regardless of how short they appear on the page. It's like, even if it's a character that appears for like 3 lines of dialogue, make that dialogue stand out.
It definitely adds life.
Yeah.
It adds life.
It adds so much life to it. And I think that's something where it's like I pulled a lot of influence for Henrietta from TV shows, because I think TV shows are really good at giving side characters their due. And her character was sort of like directly pulled from True Detective season 1, Matthew McConaughey's character in that season, but also a show called Mayor of Easttown with Kate Winslet, where it was kind of like combining this like really troubled, sort of like morally complex detective in True Detective with this sort of like mom figure who's also like playing the role of the head of a household, but also she's like a town detective with Mayor of Easttown. And the ways in which the sort of mundane and the supernatural and sort of beyond normal experiences kind of get smashed together. And so it's like, you can even take like, for a single side character, you can be like, you know, I love old Hong Kong action movies. It's like Chow Yun-fat, Jackie Chan, all these amazing actors who did a lot to sort of like carry the weight of their movies on their own. But every time like side characters came in, there was so much personality in those Hong Kong action movies, especially for like side characters. Be like, some dude shows up for like one scene and it's just like this incredible humorous exchange, and that kind of thing sticks with you, where a side character just appears but leaves a lasting impression, not only on you as a reader or a writer, but also a lasting impression on the main character. And I think when those lasting impressions sort of accrue, then it creates even more complexity and a more fascinating story for your character to exist in.
Totally. I realize I didn't answer part of your question before, Christopher. Do I ever base characters off of real people? I do. And to your point, Adrian, did something similar. I wanted to, in an initial draft, have a nod to my like very close group of friends, like a secret organization that was like just nothing, like a one-line mention, and it became, this group became a central, incredibly important group of characters throughout the story. All of their names are just anagrams of my friends' names.
Oh
and
my god.
Oh, that's
all of
awesome.
their personalities are like, I took like somewhat of a defining trait and then just stretched that out as far as I could, like silly putty, until it became like one of my friends, let's say, is like really like caring and kind and empathetic. It's like, okay, this person's literally an empath and like blah 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 blah. So I hope none of them are offended by
I would be so upset if you exaggerated my caringness.
Yeah.
Sam.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, I wouldn't mind being a villain in somebody's story. I think it'd be
Right?
kind
That could be kind of fun.
But
I've
I
always
love,
said I want to, like, if I ever want to be like an extra in a movie, I want to be like an orc or like a
Yeah.
bad guy in something, right? Like, I think it'd be super fun to be a villain.
yeah.
Navo's would be a cool villain name. I could
That is a good villain name.
I could make
Yeah.
Navo into a villain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Sam, I actually have like many references to friends and sort of like, but one of them, my friend Peter Hartog, who's the author of Bloodlines, he shows up in one of the chapters with my other friend Patricia A. Jackson as Detective Hartog and Detective Jackson, and it was so fun to be able to just like, that was just like a straight up nod to them where I'm like, I love you
Also,
guys. 'cause-
Detective Hartog sounds like just like that's
Yeah,
like a dope
that's
detective
yeah.
name.
very close to
Exactly.
Lethal Weapon. Yeah.
Exactly.
For sure.
So yeah, so when Peter read that, he texted me immediately. He was like, "Dude, I'm in tears right now. This is so amazing." But it's like, it was fun that I was able to like, because you can do that. Like, I don't think most writers are like pulling people from their real life and including a reference to them in their book and being like, I'm gonna shit all over you.
Yeah.
Like, most
Maybe
people,
roast.
most
Depends
people,
on
like,
who the person is, maybe. I
exactly,
don't know.
exactly.
This is your breakup note with your
yeah.
friends.
Right, exactly. Maybe they've got a bone to pick.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's like I'm going to include a reference there, a nod, or a basic character or something like that in like a little cameo. Usually it's done with a lot of love. And it's just really fun. Like when those people end up reading the book, they'll be like, oh, damn, I'm in it.
Nice. So you guys sound like you guys have a good grip on your characters and how you developed them. I'm curious to know if the worlds you created came first still, or you already had like this character created and it was like, what kind of world can I put this character in? It kind of goes into like the plotter versus pantser question. Did you have these characters kind of like plotted out, planned out, or were you just writing them and see how they developed on their own?
MJ, you want to go first? My dear plotter.
And say, I can go first if you want. Yeah, so for listeners of SFF Addicts, I'm like pretty infamously like a nauseating plotter. I plot in Microsoft Excel. It's a grand old time. Come hang out. But
Come
yeah,
hang
no,
out in one of my little boxes. It's a good time.
right, come hang out.
I'll color
You
code
get a whole column if you were a character. You get a whole column.
True.
But yeah, so I plan out my world and my characters and everything, and the plot of the story before I start writing anything. And I always start with world personally. No, that's not to say like I'll kind of ideate back and forth a bit, but I flesh out the whole world before I flesh out the whole main cast of characters before I flesh out the plot. I know that a ton of writers that do it completely differently, totally different orders, but like for me, that's just how it works. Because in my mind, world shapes character, right? So for all of us, the world that we live in shapes who we are, the cultural norms that are around us, whether we lean into them or rebel against them, they shape us in some way, right? So for me, I feel like I have to know at least the basis of the world, its rules. If I have a magic system, the magic system. If I'm writing sci-fi, I need to know the basis at least of how the tech works, and the kind of social norms and like the dynamics of society, generally speaking, before I can really start fleshing out my characters, because it's going to give me a lot of who they are in there through that. And then of course you get to drafting and you realize that half the shit you had planned doesn't really work. And then you throw it all out and you have to, kind of and call an audible and do it on the fly. But in theory, it's great.
Theories are always the best.
And
Theories
you
are
have-
my favorite time.
and your characters, they're kind of on equal footing, right? You have like 5, I think, from what I
Yeah,
even
so
more,
I have-
even more in thick as I
Yeah,
almost said thick as
so-
these.
and they're all kind of like on equal footing too, aren't they? There's like not like a main, maybe Raya.
Yeah.
Raya.
I was
is
gonna
probably
say
your-
Raya's probably
Book
like
one is
the
definitely
main
Raya.
character.
Yeah.
And then like Evelyn and Tristan get slightly more chapters. And
Mhm.
Ivan and Nash get slightly fewer in book 1. Book 2, I don't actually remember because I did like a count,
Book
right?
two is
Book
book
one,
two is like
I
a
don't
bit more
remember.
equal, I think.
Book 2, I was gonna say I know Ivan and Nash get to play a little bit more in book 2 for sure, which was fun for me because I had a word count restriction on book 1 for the record. I had to keep it under 100K for
Oh my God.
my publisher for book
Wow.
1,
Mm.
and book 2 is like 125K because I break the rules now. But yeah, so I had a little more room to play around in book 2 as well. But yeah, and that's the thing too. So in Among Thieves, for anyone that's watching that's not like familiar with the story, so it's a heist, but it is really 5 heists because it's a heist where every member of our heist team is planning to screw over everybody else. So I played with like doing some kind of different story structures, but I really felt like I needed to do POVs from all of my main players so that you could see. I wanted the reader to have the moment where, you know, you're reading and you see like the disaster coming before it does, and you're like, no. I wanted the reader to have that moment of
But
terror
then
when they're
just
reading and like,
I want to stay and watch the car crash.
yeah, right. I
Yeah,
hope so. Stay, come hang out, grab some popcorn. It's gonna be great.
Grab some popcorn. It's just gonna go real bad.
Right? Everything's gonna fall apart a lot of times. But yeah, that's why I wanted to do multi POV. I know it's like people are like, oh, a bold choice to do 5 POVs for your first book, and I was like, well, I didn't really think of it that way when I was writing it. I was just like, well, I need this many POVs.
And it's also
like,
not your first book,
I'm
technically.
gonna write them. Well, that's true too. It's
Yeah.
it's my first one that anyone wanted to bother to publish, but
I can relate. I'm doing 5 too. So
Is 5 a lot? I have at least 15.
that's what it's like for me as a reader.
And
I
here
feel
I
like
am,
it's not
just
a
like,
lot, but
I'll do one.
yeah, but that's the thing. Like, I talk to readers though sometimes, where they'll be like, "Oh, that's too many POVs for me. Like, I don't like that." And for me, I'm like, "Okay, great. You know what you like. I love that for
Yeah.
you." But yeah, for me as a reader, God, I'll read stuff with 1,000 POVs.
I would too.
I don't care.
Yeah, but I mean, in my case,
So.
it's like one POV was kind of necessary for the story that I wanted to tell, because it's the first book in a series of 4. It's kind of like I'm opening the door for more POVs in the future, specifically Koji, because
Yeah, like the Expanse style, right? They start with 2, and then
Yeah.
after that, every
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
has subsequently more. So.
But like, because it's a murder mystery police procedural, it's like I think keeping it more contained actually works for the benefit, as opposed to MJ's book where it's like in Among Thieves, if you have 5 people kind of all planning their own sort of like intertwined heists, it needs to have the intimacy for each
perspective. Well, and I
character
think it's
and the
kind of
perspective.
convention of genre too, right?
Yeah,
So like
exactly,
in
exactly.
noir, crime fiction, murder mystery, it's very
Common to
not
just
that
have
you
one
can't
POV.
play with stuff, but it's very much common
Yeah.
to have that
Journal-esque,
we
journal-esque,
yeah.
and like
Yeah, she walked
very-
into the room with legs to kill and whatever.
Yeah, right. It's very
And-
much like that.
and
Whereas
you
in
even
a
say
heist,
it's
I
like
think
a
you generally
case file,
get
like a case
multiple.
file. And
Yeah,
you're
exactly. It's
writing
called the
in
It's called the
first-
Hoffman report, and
Yeah.
every chapter is like kind of framed
Yeah.
as like as a case report type thing. So it needed to be that way in order for Henrietta to be able to tell her story.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like Henrietta's journey, just like the progression that she takes, is such a radical change, because like what MJ was talking about, Excel aside, she's speaking my language, where it's like I spent a lot of time creating this world before I ever wrote something in it, and thankfully I caught myself. Yes, I agree, Daniel.
I
Yeah.
agree, Daniel. Oh, you got the little thumbs up. Wait, can I
Let
do both
the
of them?
book
And will it do the
speak
thing?
for itself.
Oh, wow.
I can't do that. No, I don't.
I don't even have
Fire-
thumbs.
We're not
Fireworks.
special. We're not special, Sam.
Fireworks for
Love you
openness
guys.
to POVs and all that stuff. But I spent a lot of time building the world for Mushroom Blues. The book that I wrote before this is also set in the same world, but just in a different time period. So it was really important for me to be able to understand the intricacies of the cultures that are involved in this. It's like you have the Japanese fungal people, you have the Caprinian humans. This is a world with majority humans, but there's a lot of prejudice between from the Caprinian side of things toward the fungal people. And for me, it was really important to have that kind of framework to understand, like, okay, this is the sort of cultural brainwashing essentially that Henrietta has been raised in. This is her experiential norm. And so that allowed for her to come into this place, this city called Neokanoko, where it's in, you know, the capital city of the fungal people. Literal buildings are made of mycelium and mushrooms and mold and all this kind of stuff. The fungal people, you know, like have mushroom caps and are able to communicate with each other empathically through mycelium. And Henrietta being, you know, discriminatory based on her sort of cultural programming from Caprinia, but also her own mycophobia and the fact that she hates mushrooms. It's like, this place is a literal fucking hell for her. So that was a good starting point for her to be quite unlikable at the beginning, which is very intentional. And for her toward the end of the book to go through this journey, very much based in my own experiences with psychedelics, to kind of have mushrooms, in this case, the people that she meets, the experiences that she has, the investigation that she's trying to solve, being the sort of crucial journey for her to open her eyes and awaken and understand the flaws of her cultural programming, the wrongness of it, and for her to start to understand that she can seek her own truth. And so it was really important for me to have world first, because Henrietta needed to be rooted in a culture that made sense within this context, but also provided a very real contrast to the fungal people, which is why her and Koji had to come together as well, to be sort of this like dynamic duo where Henrietta's like, I don't want to spend time with this dude, and her her captain is basically like, yeah, well, I don't give a shit. Like, you two are going to work together and this is how it's going to go. And so she's forced into this situation, but that allows for the steps towards her changing and going through like for me, what was a really meaningful character arc.
I think for me, I'm a huge plot guy. Like, plot will take you really far in my mind, in the stories that I watch or read or what have you. So I knew, and this is, by the way, not how I suggest doing it. There's a reason it took me 10 years. But I knew that I wanted to have an elemental magic system, and I knew how I wanted a couple other, I won't spoil it, but I knew I wanted book one to end, and then kind of had to work backwards into it. Which also isn't great because I knew it was book one of 3. So I was building like from the studs of a house basically, and then figuring out the blueprint.
Sam, did you know the ending of book 1 before the ending of book 3?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we talked to Julia V and Ken Babel recently, and it's like our masterclass is on writing from the end, and it's kind of like, I can imagine for you writing from the end of book 1 and kind of going backwards, but also knowing like from that ending, you have to get into a book 2, you have to get into a book 3, you have to set up all that stuff.
Yeah.
At the same time.
That was I mean, thankfully, so book 1 is a self-contained story, but it also very cleanly transitions into book 2, which has a very clear plot and then an overarching plot. So it's almost like brackets, like book 1 is self-contained, and then like book 2 is another bracket, and then the overarching book 3, it's pretty clear in there in the way that I hope the ending of book 1 is satisfying and complete, but you're also like, okay, I know where they're going next. And so I knew the magic system I want to use, and I knew I want to have co-protagonists, which slotted into the magic. So it's like a Greek, well, it's actually a couple different magic systems layered onto one another, but a Greek elemental system. So, fire, air, water, earth. And so that helped then determine a lot of the other kind of, for lack of a better term, elements within the story of world and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of it grew. So what I learned was that I unfortunately need to write in order to understand the ideas, which is why it took me 7 drafts. So moving forward, I'm going to be writing out outlines as opposed to entire books. But the characters, it kind of goes back to what I said before. So like I knew what these 2 main characters would be more or less, and the personalities that would go with them, and the abilities and strengths and weaknesses that would kind of naturally branch into that. And then other characters kind of bloomed and blossomed. But I think the world developed. I didn't have the world fully developed. Thank you, Bo. And Bo, if you're still out there, maybe you can answer whether or not the end of book 1 was a satisfying conclusion or if it's not. But I do definitely agree with you, MJ, in the sense that like I need to at least have an idea of the world that I'm building into. To then basically it goes like high level world overview, general idea of plot, and then I kind of get into it more from there, and then I learn by writing. So I'll write out, okay, this happens. Oh, this other cool thing. Let's mix and match there.
But I don't know if it's happened to either of you, but like I found a lot of the writing for Mushroom Blues ended up teaching me a lot about the world as well. Like you were saying, like you have the sort of broader sense of the world.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the intricacies come through the draft and learning like what are these characters. It needs book 2, man.
Hell yeah.
a lot of the cool like nuances of a world come through seeing what the characters do, and seeing what is kind of like born from them. Like in Mushroom Blues, like the fungal people, the way that they have this like empathic form of sort of like brain to brain communication called the fungal net, that there were like early ideas of that when I wrote the book before this, but that really came into its own when I was writing Mushroom Blues, and that like I incorporated it wholesale. Like I'm just like, this needs to be. That was halfway through my first draft, and I was like, oh fuck, well I got to go back and like really
gotta change some stuff.
Like really immerse this into the story as much as possible.
That's funny, Adrian, because I feel like for me, world is like the one thing. Because okay, so when you say you're a plotter, then you always get people that are like, well, what happens if you think of something brilliant during the thing? You can't do it because it's not in your outline. And it's like, well, of course I can do it. Nobody is like, it's not like I'm being like minded over my shoulder what I can do. But for me, my world is like the one thing that I pretty much have in stone before I start drafting anything. Because like during my world building process, I have like, I'll come up with like, so okay, for Among Thieves, I have this big OneNote document, and it has a folder for each of my kingdoms. And for each of those kingdoms, I have like a subfolder for inspiration images, and a subfolder for descriptions, and then a subfolder that lists out dozens of city names and possible noble family names and things like that kind of fit in with the like vernacular and the kind of language and culture of this like land that I'm interpreting. And I have their major trade exports and what kinds of like different relationships they have with one another. And for me, that's the groundwork that my entire story sits on. And yeah, so then it's really nice to have all those names, because you always know I hate naming stuff. It takes so long to think of names. So if I have all the names, it's the worst part, right? That's the worst part of doing sci-fi fantasy.
I'm big into etymology. Every single one of my names is like hours of research, and they're all very
that's exactly where I'm like, oh my gosh, and now I have to, oh great, they came across a river, fantastic, now I get to name it.
I had so much fun naming my rivers, y'all. Whatever,
so glad for you, Adrian. I cannot relate. But yeah, so if I name as much stuff as possible beforehand, like I could be like, oh no, shoot, I need to reference like this noble family from this other kingdom. Right. It's not going to come up again. Instead of then taking a break and spending 45 minutes getting back into the mindset where I can name that, I just go to my OneNote document and I steal it. Right. But yeah, with the kernels popping during the writing, I love that that metaphor there, because that does definitely happen for me with character. I make a lot of decisions on the fly for character and my plot subplots. Like honestly, character relationship arcs. So like the Raya Evelyn dynamic, that happened on accident on page in book 1. It was on purpose by book 2. But in book 1, I was like, oh, do I sense some chemistry here, ladies? Let's go.
Did their fingers graze?
Yeah, right, exactly. So yeah. But yeah, it's so weird. World is like the one thing that's like
I think for me, like my world is like super well thought out, but it like just because of like my artistic mind, like 80% of it is like visuals in my head. And then a lot of it, it's like, I would say 75% of it is more or less planned beforehand. But that last 25% just kind of like spontaneously, like those kernels pop during drafting.
Would you say it fruited on the page?
Those bodies,
like a fruiting body?
Yeah, 100%. So
I think there's a distinction too between world and, I guess for lack of a better term, magic system. So if you're developing like a political world and there's all these different factions and parties or whatever, like that's in history or whatever, that's its own
and it
thing.
really helps to have all that stuff like
exactly, versus like what Adrian was saying, and relevant for me too, where it's like, how does the magic system work together, and you problem solve from one thing and you're like, wow, that's brilliant, like let me take the spores of that and
that's way better than what I had. Let me use that. Yeah.
So like even like with this novella that I'm releasing soon, it's incredibly lore heavy. It's basically meant to be a lore book told in it's very, very first person. The most, it's journal entries. It's the most first person you can get. But even as I was writing it, I've got my lore and magic system very flushed out. There was like kernels in there where I was like, wow, the depth of this is much, like I can do a lot more with this than I realized I could. And to your point, Adrian, that it comes out in the writing kind of as you're fleshing it out, where all of the ideas have been percolating in your mind for however many years, and you put something down and then you realize, oh, there's more there. I can keep digging.
I'm just like, I'm not going to be able to get like the popcorn analogy out of my head. I'm just going to think of my brain as like a popcorn maker. And be like,
I love it.
Just throw all those little kernels in there and see how they absorb.
Honestly, on a really busy day, sometimes that's how it feels. Just like,
It's like I'm overflowing. There's too much butter. Shit's going awry.
Never too much butter.
I think for how many times I like change my characters and some of their perks and quirks and all that, the world has always remained the same since I started it. It was like you mentioned, MJ, it was a foundation, and that foundation really hasn't changed too much. It's matured in my writing from the 5+ years I've been writing it, but yeah, it's kind of still kind of remained the same from its original thing for sure. But characters keep changing, which I need to stop.
No, but that's the thing. It's like I've talked to many friends about this, like Nick Eames, who wrote Kings of the Wild and Bloody Rose. Like I've talked to him a lot about characters and how sometimes the character that you're writing, when it feels like it's a struggle, usually it's not the world, it's the character that there's an issue with. And he's found that completely switching a character and trying out someone else's POV, like we talked to Christopher Buehlman about this as well, MJ, trying that out, like it doesn't hurt. Like you as a writer, the book isn't published, so you can take that time to be like, I'm gonna spend like a day trying to put myself into this character's head and see if they might be the right fit, and that could completely change the entire dynamic, and you could be completely invigorated and ready to push forward with this story because you found the character whose narrative and place within that world is the most engaging to you as a writer, which means it will likely be the most engaging to the reader as well. So it's like trust in that instinct when you're like, man, this character is just, maybe they don't suck, but the experience of writing them sucks.
Yeah, well, if you're not feeling attached to it.
Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
Then there's something that's off. Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that because I'm doing that with mine now that I'm entering my second draft. I have this husband and wife duo, and for the first draft, it was all the husband's point of view. And I'm finding writing him as I was getting later in the book, the first draft, I was like, the wife has the more interesting story here. Why am I not just telling it from her point of view? And so the second draft is rewriting all of his scenes with her point of view now. And I find her to be more compelling, more interesting of a character. And I imagine readers would probably find her more interesting than the husband. Now, I'm not putting him off to a complete side. I think maybe in book 2, he might be a POV again. But yeah, definitely book 1, it's all her, I think.
Yeah. And
sure.
I mean, it's like if you're able to rewrite those scenes
in her voice,
the wife's perspective, that means that the husband is still very much present. So you haven't like shrugged him off as a character completely. Sometimes it's like the characters that are side characters or major non-POV characters, that kind of thing, like end up being the most interesting. And it's like, embrace that and play around with it, make some popcorn. See if it works, see if it's tasty enough. Even if it's not, then just like spit it out and go back to what you were doing.
Yeah, and then you can always go back, because I do that all the time. Like in Among Thieves, there were so many chapters where I was like, I don't know if this really works, this chapter from, Nash's perspective. I don't know. But well, Ivan's in this scene too. Let me rewrite this scene from Ivan's perspective. And there were a few in that where it was like, oh, yeah. This is the vibe now. And then there were a few where I was like, never mind.
Yeah.
Rewind.
That's a good thing. It's like you can scrap it. And
that's my favorite thing. You always get another draft. Like, I mean, not always, right? But like, especially like, I mean, I guess a little less so in trad because theoretically you have deadlines and stuff. But like, when you're in control, like, take another draft. Take a moment, right? You can do as many iterations as you want. No time is wasted. Like, I wrote an entire. So the project we're one of the projects that I'm working on right now. I initially wrote it in first person present tense from a single POV. And now it is, I know we're all getting hungry now. But now it's like, I've got like, I don't know, 7 or 8 POVs and it is third person past tense, right? And it's like, I had to redo the whole thing from it. But like the time spent writing it in the first person, that wasn't wasted because I still like got some of my ideas out. I still kind of got some of my like, some of the pieces, board game pieces. I was able to set them out on the board. But always another draft.
Yeah, and depending on your style too, like I'm thinking of at least one chapter right now that is a fight scene that switches POVs with scene breaks between all 3 of the characters to tell something different and important about what's happening, right? One from an observer to, this honored duel from outside the culture that kind of just wants everyone to get along because their lives are on the line. One from like a old wizened mentor who understands the lesson that he's about to impart, and one from an angry and overzealous warrior who is trying to prove herself. And it's all the same scene happening at the exact same time, and you can just switch a POV and tell a very different story of what's happening and still move everything forward. So depending if obviously in a book like Adrian's, that's a bit harder, but you always have that option to move the camera around, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I mean, in Mushroom Blues, there were some points where it was challenging for me to have Henrietta be involved in a particular scene, and have there be logical consistency for why she would be there. Because that's why I'm excited for future books where I can sort of like incorporate Koji as a POV to also not only expand his character and his personality and experiences, but also to provide alternative paths for the story to take where it makes more sense for Koji to be in this place versus Henrietta. Or like you're saying, for them to be able to experience the same thing but from different perspectives.
Yes.
That is really, really powerful. Like Fonda Lee's The Greenbone Saga does an amazing job of having multiple POV characters experience the same scenario, but from completely different perspectives.
It completely changes it sometimes, right?
It
for sure.
Much, and it is absolutely brilliant. So I think it is really important for writers to understand like what is the purpose of my character being in this scene? Does it make sense for them to be there? And if you have multiple POVs, like MJ has said, like, experiment with trying that scene. If it is so vital to have a different character experience it. Like there's one scene, like it's a police procedural, so of course I had to do an interrogation. But the interrogator is Koji, and there's some crazy shit that goes on, but it's like, it at first didn't make sense, like how Henrietta could experience it. But then I was able to incorporate her into the scene, and in such a way that she was able to become involved as sort of like an observer within that interrogation.
Well, I think that worked out well because it turned it into more of a foreshadowing of something versus giving away something. So that's kind of a thing too. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise, right?
Yeah,
that you had
it also
felt handcuffed.
It also worked out because I've had readers who have told me that scene was the one that they felt was the biggest shift for Koji and Henrietta's relationship, where Henrietta was able to better understand what Koji is going through, and for her to sort of begin to open her eyes to the realities of what the fungal people are experiencing, and sort of like abuses of power and different things like that. So these things can really surprise you, where it's like, oh shit, that ended up being a scene that was working on like 5 different levels, but it all stemmed from me trying to figure out how is my POV character going to logically fit within the framework of this scene. And so there are so many moments where you can be surprised by that kind of thing, and multiple, like a chapter in a scene can work on multiple different levels at the same time, to be like, I'm going to give you characterization for him, I'm going to give you characterization for her, we're going to move the plot forward in this way, you're going to get a little bit of world building, and just giving readers kind of like a complete package, like a cohesive experience within a single scene or in a single chapter, where they're like, this is amazing, and they don't realize like the quantity of information that they're absorbing.
Sweet. So you guys have these amazing characters in some of your cases built. What was for you guys, what was the way you wanted to introduce the reader to it? What was that key element that this was going to be your very first chapter or whatever, where they're appear? How are you going to approach that to the reader to make them say, hey, this is going to be somebody kind of complex, a little bit interesting, and then, but not without being all like preachy about the character. So how did you guys approach that initial introduction to your character?
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm not shy. I'll go, because I'm actually super passionate about this. I think for me, this is the biggest part of one of the biggest elements of my plotting process. Is deciding my character introductions, because I feel strongly that the first time any character, but especially the important ones, appears on the page should be during a quintessential character moment. The first impression your reader should get of every important character should be that character doing something that just is so quintessentially that character that it kind of immediately, it's a first impression, right? Like first impressions are very important in real life. They're very important in fiction. So like, let's see if I can, it's been years since I wrote Among Thieves, and I haven't read it since it was published because I refuse to, because I'm scared I'll find typos. But so like, okay, the first time we see Raya, she is talking to her hatchets while she scales a wall to sneak in somewhere. That's pretty quintessentially Raya, right? Mm-hmm. The first time we see Tristan, he's kind of like a little bit nervous, but very like charismatic and being a cheat at the card table, right? He's being his like, kind of charming, mysterious self, right? That's very quintessentially Tristan. First time we see Nash, she has shit covered boots and she's propping them up on a merchant's table, right? Like these are things where like I like was just trying to distill the most quintessential piece of that character. I said quintessential like 16 times in this, but it's the perfect word. But yeah,
Quintessential is a quintessential word.
It is the quintessential word of the
Yeah.
quintessential character moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's, for me, that's like a good portion of my plotting time that I spend sitting. And I try to do it by summing every character once I finish doing the full build. So like I do a character bio, I find inspiration images, and then I do a character interview where I'll ask the character 20, 40 questions and answer in their voice of all those questions. Once I've finished all that, I try to take all of that and boil it down to one sentence about this character. Like if I had to describe this character in one sentence, what is it? And then I take that one sentence and go, okay, what is something they could feasibly be doing when the plot starts that is this one sentence? So yeah, that's how I do it.
I'm incredibly impressed by your organization and
Yeah.
Are we impressed or afraid? It's just very type A. It's maybe
You guys wanted
problematic.
MJ to go first.
It is fear based in something great. But I think like your quintessential kind of moment approach, I think for me is like that's really important in the way that I view character introductions as well. It's like what is the character, not only is the character sort of like involved in something that is a little bit more propellant, like I get really bothered when a character is introduced but nothing's really happening. When they feel like they are grounded in an experience and acting upon that moment in a way that feels as true to their character as could possibly be done in an introduction. Like obviously Mushroom Blues is a murder mystery, so it starts off with a crime scene. So that was a good moment for me to be able to just like thrust people into Henrietta's head and have them experience, okay, like she's on a beach, there's basically like a dead child in a bag, and that not only allows me to introduce her as a detective and sort of convey her professional nature, the way that she approaches a crime scene and whatnot, but it also allows me to introduce how she feels about the fungal people, her own personal backstory, because you know she's a mother, and what would a mother experience when they find a dead child washed up in a bag on a beach, you know? So it's kind of like providing context for her own internal conflicts, her own trauma, through the lens of this crime scene that she's been placed into. Koji, on the other hand, is like he's very much a character that's rooted in spiritualism. He's rooted in his culture. At the same time, he's very conflicted. And so when I introduce Koji, it's kind of like he's torn between two worlds. He's torn between his role as a police officer for the Neo-Kanoko Police Department, working for the humans, but then also as a protector of his own people, where he's trying to help out an elderly fungal man who is the prime witness, but then also, no spoilers, this is like chapter 2, basically like a protest that is occurring near the crime scene. So it's kind of like presenting Koji as this person who's very conflicted between his responsibilities, his heritage, his culture, versus the people who he is working for. And so every character introduction can speak volumes about what that character is about. Even if it's, like I said earlier, like a small side character. That introduction, like I have one small character who he shows up on the shelf, which is basically like an ad hoc floating fungal community that's basically like growing out of a destroyed bridge. So it's like a floating fungal island. So there's this one character who knows Koji. They have history together, and they're able to sense each other within this environment, given their abilities with the fungal net. He's basically just like, he has like a seafood stall on the island, but with probably 8 lines of dialogue between the two of them, I'm able to establish a rapport between those two characters through my description of this vendor. I'm able to give a sense of his character and his personality through his speech and the way that he interacts with Koji. There's so many ways that you can introduce a character through the description, through their dialogue, through their interactions with the world, but interactions with other characters. You can just lay with very, very few words. You can lay out like a really strong foundation for the reader to just graft their imagination onto and expound beyond what you've ever told them.
Cool.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't have much to add. Those are exactly what I would say as well. I think, you know, the initial moments, I think my brain always goes to movies or TV shows, and you're not gonna watch a good or compelling TV show and have an opening scene with a character and, you know, in 30 seconds not know basically who that character is in full. You know, I think of first example that comes to mind is the opening scene of Deadpool, and you immediately are like, yeah, I know exactly who this person. I don't need any explanation at all.
And it kind of like allows you to ignore all of the he doesn't read. Oh.
I don't even know how to read.
Deep cut, Nicholas. But it's like, isn't it cool that like you can just push aside all the bullshit about a character that's like, they have tons of backstory, of course, but you can just push like the majority of that aside and give people like a really quick introduction, and then slowly start to like infuse more of their story.
Yeah,
as
you
the
can
story
learn
progresses.
You can learn more as you go, and then also like, I mean, what I like to do just personally in my writing is I really, really, really like foreshadowing and dropping Easter eggs, and so I do a lot of that in my character introductions. But I have in my head kind of a big 5 main characters, even though there's like upwards of 30 characters. And how I introduce, you know, one of them is in the prologue, and it's this like gripping war scene basically, and then it smash cuts into like, well, in my head, you know, you hear My Own Worst Enemy by Lit playing, and it smash cuts to like a teen comedy. You know, one of the main characters basically
back in high school.
Yeah,
baby.
yeah. It's like fixing his hair in front of a trophy case where he's looking at his own trophies. And he's like, and you're just like, okay, so this person's maybe a little bit shallow, but, you know, good-hearted and all that kind of stuff. But everything MJ and Adrian said is so important. You really have a couple sentences to explain who that character is in broad strokes, right? Obviously, there's going to be subtleties, but what would that character be doing if you just got them down to their smallest popcorn kernel before, you know, it explodes into who they truly are, is really important. And I think the similar analogy I would give in writing is white room syndrome, where a lot of the time people will start a chapter or in a setting, and it takes to explain it briefly, it's a term meaning like when you go to a new setting or a new scene, if you don't explain where you are, what's around you, the reader kind of has a white room. It's just empty space. So you have to set the foundation before you can move forward. And same thing with characters, right? Like you don't want to just have this blob of character name and then, you know, 8 pages later they learn who they are. You want to set who they are and then give depth and texture to it.
Yeah, it's like first, like I think opening lines, while not like always important, in the sense of like I think people put too much weight into how good a first line has to be. But I think the real important thing about a first line or first lines, first paragraphs is like how well does that establish your character and your world in conjunction? Like, but like most importantly, character. Like my first line is "No good day ever started with death before coffee," and that tells you a lot about Henrietta. Where it's like, okay, she's someone who's dealt with death. She also likes coffee. This is going to be a shit day, and how is Henrietta going to deal with that? Like one line can tell so much about what this character
And I already relate to her, so it's like
I know that's what I was gonna say. No good day starts with anything before coffee.
Yep, exactly, right?
Coffee is first.
Everyone's like, Jonah, I know it. All right, I'm hooked. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like your lines, the way that you kind of like your prose style, the way that you kind of imbue your prose to evoke that character, that can say so much about them. Like Raya, she's like so fucking nonchalant about like, I'm climbing a castle or like a keep.
No big deal.
I got my hatchets. I also talk to my hatchets, and you're like, okay, she's like
As
not mentally sound, but like, you know.
Typical Monday afternoon.
Where it counts.
Yeah.
I mean, she's making it work for her.
She's making it work, man. She's making it work. But you can do a lot with your character introductions to introduce a really strong character voice, to evoke their personality in a lot of ways.
Cool. So, Adrian, you touched on this earlier, and I'm kind of curious on what you guys think on this a little more. Time put into side characters. Is there a time where you think, as you're writing this, it's like, hey, I think this might make a good main character, maybe not in this particular series, but if I expand this series into another series set, maybe in the same world, or maybe in later installments of the same series, where you're like, I'm going to make this side character main. I think it's a fun character. Maybe I enjoyed writing it, and do I want to go further with it? What's your thoughts on doing that? Do you think it makes the story a little convoluted? Do you feel like it maybe might take away from the plot if you add more characters? What do you guys think?
I mean, I think it's all situational. Like sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Mm-hmm.
Like in Mushroom Blues, so many of the characters that are side characters that really like leapt off the page while I was writing them, I'm not necessarily thinking like that character is going to be a POV in a future book, but I could think of that character deserves more page time in a future book. There are characters who appear in Mushroom Blues who will also appear in other books within the Fungalverse. A, because it's like I set it up that way, but B, because I also created some characters and I'm like, you're just way too fucking awesome. I'm going to keep doing your thing. I think there weren't any characters, like other than Koji, there was no one so strong that I felt compelled to veer away from my vision of what Mushroom Blues was meant to be. But that doesn't mean that I can't elaborate on those characters in like I have characters where it's like, okay, I'm gonna write like a novelette from your POV as sort of like a universe tie-in story, or I'm gonna write something else where you're going to feature more prominently, maybe a short story, or maybe you're going to be a full-on POV character in something else. Because I'm doing different timelines, I'm able to kind of play around with that to be like, this character is going to have more page time, or they're going to be a POV character, but they're going to appear in this book like 30 years later. And so it's kind of cool to also be able to think, this is how awesome this character is now. What can I do with them with 30 years of added experience? So there's so many ways that you can play around with it.
Yeah, I think when it comes to character, when it comes to anything in your book, in my point of view is, if it's not essential, it shouldn't be there. And that's coming from someone who wrote a 235,000 word book. So there's definitely stuff that shouldn't be there. But, draft 6 was like 265K. And then I was, and that,
donkey boy.
And then cutting out as much as you possibly can. But especially with characters, something Adrian said before, the last thing in the world you want to do, well, not the last thing in the world, it's obviously hyperbole, but it's not a great experience for the reader to just introduce a character who's purely a plot device, unless it's like, I mean, that's something The Simpsons might do in a very like intentionally comedic way, and then
but that's like very
meta
satire
beyond. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think there's two answers to your question. There are side characters who are side characters, and they're perfect side characters. The example that comes to mind is the cabbage salesman in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Yes, for anyone who's
so good.
If he has any more lines than my cabbages, the character doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
and that's the exact, but maybe one of the most memorable characters in the show. And with a couple lines of setup dialogue and then just popping in throughout, it's a beloved character, right? But you're not going to turn if you did a whole 3-season arc on this character, you could, I guess, but
it overstays its welcome, and
exactly.
It overstays its welcome. It loses its magic.
Yeah, and they actually make fun of that specifically in the Ember Islands player episode where they reference the cabbage salesman having. So there are ways to do it, obviously, but I think as far as side characters go, if the character is playing an important enough role in the story, as Adrian said, you don't necessarily need to write their entire biography, from birth to death to everything in between. But they should be enough of a person that you can imagine that once they leave the page, there's a life to be lived there, and there's some sort of emotional attachment. And when that cabbage guy gets destroyed, your brain immediately goes to does he have a family, and how long did it take to grow those cabbages?
Oh man, his wife is probably on the verge of leaving his ass.
Exactly. Exactly. Your brain will fill in the gaps. But then again, there are side characters that you can fall in love with and can write entire stories around. I wrote an entire novella for a character that it was dead millions of years before book 1 started. So I think that you find that as you go, but there's a purpose for characters who aren't your main characters, and that doesn't diminish their there's no small parts, just small actors. Sometimes the role of a character might be 10 lines of dialogue, and that doesn't make them any less important. And if you can make it's honestly more of a testament in my mind to the value of that character if they have an incredibly small amount of page time, but they're still pivotal to what's happening, then you've done something right.
Less is more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think that does work sometimes, even for quite main characters. In Among Thieves, Callum Clem, God, I don't know how many times he's on the page. He's probably on the page for maybe 15, 20 pages, maybe more than that, but not much. But he's hugely important to the story. And it was very intentional for me to have him just kind of be not on the page for a lot of it. For I don't want to spoil, but one of the fun reason why I did that is because he is smarter than me, so I couldn't do a POV from him. I know my limits. But for other things, so the only time I've ever had the situation where people are like, oh my gosh, when your characters just take over and now suddenly this side character is super important, I was always like, no, I planned my characters before, and I kind of do. But in book 2 of Among Thieves, there's a character called Jocelyn who shows up, and she was not really, she was supposed to just kind of be, Raya meets her in a prison. I guess that's kind of a spoiler, but it's Raya, so it's not really that much of a spoiler. And it was supposed to just kind of be a conversation between two people in cells. And then I was like, ooh, okay, but I like this girl. She's interesting. And so then I ended up giving her a way more important part. And she
and who she becomes is oh shit, this is really good.
Yeah. And that was an example of that was a popcorn kernel, right? Mm-hmm. So that's an example of something where I did kind of make an audible on the fly for a side character to bring them into the fold a little bit more. So I think that can be done sparingly. I don't think that can be done every time you find a side character that makes you go, ooh, they're fun, because then you'll end up with a cast of 800,000 characters.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think it's up to every writer. You just kind of it's one of those things you just kind of know. It's a dumb thing, but it's that's a horrible explanation. But you just feel it when you're
it's instinctual.
This feels right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's instinctual.
This puzzle piece feels like it goes right there. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a character named Rio. I've mentioned this in interviews I've done where it's she didn't appear until the second draft.
I couldn't believe that when you told me that, because I love her. She's great.
She her introduction is if anyone, that whole scene is my love letter to Cowboy Bebop. But her introduction is she's on a stage, but she just fucking owns that stage. She owns that scene. And then who she becomes is like, damn, I adore you as a character. And she was the one specifically where I'm like, okay, you're like playing a much bigger role in book 2 because I just adore everything that happens to you. And she's even in like the epilogue, because I just felt like I had to like wrap up her, at least within this book, her, like
Initial
relatively
arc.
short
Yeah.
character arc in such a way where I'm like, okay, I need to give you a nod to be like, she's going to be more important for everything else that's going to happen in this series, because there are just some characters that they just captivate you. And
Absolutely.
she straight up started out as like, you're like a cabaret singer, where's that gonna go? And then it's like, oh shit, you're like
Right.
a
Oh, it's
linchpin.
going all of these places.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and she ended up being like a linchpin for a big part of the investigation.
Well, guys, I promised these guys an hour and a half, so we'll be wrapping up soon. So if you do have questions, put them in now. I'm just going to throw out maybe some a little lighter questions here for these guys. Your favorite character to write, and it doesn't match your reader's favorite character of your books.
So my favorite character to write is Nash and Raya. I like writing Raya too. She's like
I feel
Raya
like Raya's
thinks
like your spirit animal.
she's like the dark side of my internal monologue, right?
Yeah.
Like if I were to lean into the dark side, with like just the sarcasm and just the general sense of being over everything. But no, Nash is one of my favorites to write. But I do get a lot of the time people loving Ivan as a character, which I love that.
He's so complex, MJ.
I spent a long time
Yeah.
building Ivan, and then like especially like so even like the prose in his chapters, because the language that the book is written, I mean it's written in English, but it's written in Tamori Common. The language, he doesn't speak that. It's not his first language. He does speak it, but it's not his first language. So like I took a lot of care even in the prose in his chapters, making sure that I was using phrasing and words to make it feel like the thoughts of somebody translating their own thoughts as they're speaking them, right? So I'm glad that a lot of people really liked him, but that was kind of unexpected for me. And then people tell me they love Tristan all the time too, which, sorry, everyone.
Yeah. Sam, I'll let you go because I
Yeah.
only have one POV character, but I can elaborate. It's like, you got like fucking 15 to choose from.
Yeah.
You got options. You got options.
Yeah.
My favorite character by far to write is Pax. He's my favorite character in the series, at least now, out of one book of the series. And he's very fun. Again, I won't spoil kind of his arc or what happens with him. But he doesn't seem to be anyone else's favorite character. Not that people dislike him, but everyone really gravitates, which is good, but to the two main characters, Cooper and Reed.
Mhm.
And I find them to be the hardest characters to write.
And they're your main ones. That's so hard.
They're my main character. Everyone else's voice is incredibly clear in my head. And with Cooper and Reed, because they're so similar and they're in many ways a reflection of me, like they're written to be like 17, 18-year-old kids from Earth, like easily the most relatable, to make their voices distinct and in character. I'm always second guessing and questioning it. And then people are really drawn to them, which means I did my job, thankfully. But for me, Pax is the most fun because he's very much, he's extremely dynamic and smart and playing a bunch of different sides against each other. And he knows a lot in book one, more than the reader knows, which means that I'm able to play a lot more than when everything is a lot more to be discovered, as you go along. So hopefully there's some Pax stands out there eventually. But
yeah, I mean, I'm kind of pigeonholed because I have one POV character, but I think Henrietta is. I adore writing Henrietta. Like her character just like came alive to me throughout the writing process, and a lot of people have trouble with her at the beginning because she is unlikable.
Yeah, you're supposed to, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
And that has put off some readers,
Character
like,
for sure.
but that's par for the course, It's not going to work for everybody. Koji is the one where like most people gravitate towards Koji. Like the amount of people who are like Koji stan and all that, I'm like, Good. I'm glad you love Koji because he's a POV character in the next book.
Right.
I love writing Koji, but one of my favorite characters to write, because I'm reworking the novel that I wrote before, Mushroom Blues. There's one character named Cage, and he's like a half breed, so half fungal, half human, gangster tattoo artist who is basically like the tattoo artist for a gangster crime family. Hi, Thorin. And so Cage is really he's probably the most emblematic of me, of any character that I've ever written, especially because he's a tattoo artist, and like me having been a tattoo artist professionally, I was able to just like put so much of myself into his experiences. But man, he's such a fuck up, and it's great. He just like stumbles into disaster after disaster, but I have so much fun writing him as a character. But I'm also just very excited for people to read more Koji and to see the other POV character that I've got for that book. So
nice. So I got one final question for you guys. What would you say is your character? Probably maybe your pick, probably the most main character for your books. What is their biggest fear? What would you say is their biggest fear?
That's easy for me. This is an exercise I did when developing every single character. So I guess you can. Cooper and Reed are dual protagonists, but so I'll be very quick. Cooper's is basically growing up, and he's very much Peter Pan character, and Reed's is not living up to his potential. That's where they start, at least.
Yeah. I mean, Raya's is just being trapped, but that doesn't necessarily mean obviously physically. And I think for her, it means being known in any way by anyone, in any sort of genuine way. My poor little broken-souled baby.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Henrietta, for sure, it's losing control. Like, she is an ex-alcoholic. She's had a very fucked up past. She's done terrible things. And all the terrible things that have happened in her life are when she starts to lose control, whether it's to addiction, whether it's to, especially in Mushroom Blues, institutions tend to take away a lot of control for her. So it's kind of like a combination of fear and the most potent source of frustration for her. Mostly because she's just like, she hates herself in a lot of ways. But then she's grown to love herself, which is good too.
Growth. We love it.
Yeah,
it's all about
absolutely.
growth, man. Yeah.
It's I always enjoy stories where I may not like the main character at the beginning, but when you get to that end and they're like, wow, I love this character, kind of thing. That's just even
So
more
satisfying.
Sure.
Yeah.
Guys, any last thoughts on character? Anything you want to share with maybe people maybe writing like myself, and any kind of like last little nuggets about character?
I mean, for me, the biggest thing is to trust your characters. Obviously, you're going to have your own instincts as a writer and a level of trust that you have to develop with yourself. But if you try to, speaking of control, if you try to control your characters too much and not trust in their ability to reveal themselves through the course of the story, then you're going to stifle them. And ultimately, you're going to stifle your story. So trust in your characters as much as you trust in yourself and your own abilities as a writer.
MJ, you want to go for it?
Sure. I mean, well, because I mean, I love that for Adrian's. If you're more of a planner, a super planner like me, your characters will probably usually follow your instructions.
They're my slaves.
They don't.
Well, it's more like I get to know them before I made the plot anyway. So I guess they guide me through the plot.
I have at least two characters not following the instructions.
You're like, hey, don't listen. But yeah, if you're a super plotter, do the character interview thing. Like that has been a game changer for me. And when I say like I answer in their voice, I mean literally on the character interview for Raya, the first question is like, "What's your full name?" And I think I just wrote, "Fuck you." Right? So it's like just literally answer how that character would answer. Don't answer the questions if they wouldn't answer them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is super helpful, and it teaches me about the character, but it also gives me their speaking voice.
Mm-hmm.
So when I go to write dialogue on the page for the first time, it's so easy because I already know how they all talk. So yeah, that would be my biggest piece of advice. And like, so pitching my project, I do have a full character
I was about
interview
to pitch it for you.
in my ultimate SFF story Bible, where I think I have 30 questions. I forget how many I put in there, but also too, like, I guess, reverse pitch. You can just Google character interview and you can get some for free. So if you don't want to use the Bible, that's okay, but do the interview.
I think my biggest piece of advice, pick up John Truby's Anatomy of Story. It's the book that helped me by far the most accelerate my writing. And the tidbit of character info there, there's much more in the book, but basically every character should be a foil to the central theme and idea, which is my fist in this instance. I don't know why I visualize it, but
I like it.
and every character should be a foil expanding on some central idea there. So if the idea, he's Batman Begins as an example, Batman is a symbol of fear, and how does the Scarecrow play into that? How does Ra's al Ghul play into that? How does the crime bosses and conquering fear versus using fear versus living in fear, and all of those different things. So really good book, but the tidbit being make sure that every character actually expounds on the ideas that you're trying to write about.
Give them all a purpose because they deserve it.
Exactly. Even the lowly cabbage salesman has a purpose.
Even the unnamed characters.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. Hey, everyone in chat, thank you for stopping by and sitting down and listening to these guys. And I'm sure they appreciate it. And I'm going to pass it on to these guys as to where you can find them and their books.
Yeah. You can find me on all the major social media platforms: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, wherever else, at MJ Kuhn Books, all one word, or just go to mjkuhn.com. You can find, thanks, Daniel. You can find my social links, my buy links, my everything links there. So yeah.
Sam, go for it.
Yeah, you can find my books, my book currently on Amazon, or signed paperbacks on elementsoftime.ca. You can find me on Instagram and on Twitter. Instagram at Elements of Time Book. Twitter, I think it's S Paisley Author. I don't know. I don't use social media nearly well enough. And I will also be running a Kickstarter to help with the audiobook in the next month or two. And there'll be audiobook Kickstarter exclusives, novella launch, a whole bunch of stuff. So if you're interested in the series, Kickstarter exclusive stuff there. And I'll be on all the socials and whatnot promoting it. But elementsoftime.ca if you want everything in one package.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Adrian M. Gibson. Majority, I'm mostly active on Instagram and Twitter, a little bit on Facebook. You can check out my website, adrianmgibson.com. I've got merch there. You can buy tattoo designs to get tattooed by an artist near you. You can pick up Mushroom Blues, my debut novel, and paperback, ebook, hardcover. There are also signed hardcovers available on thebrokenbinding.co.uk. And if anyone is in Glasgow for Worldcon early next month, send me a message, send me a tweet, hit me up, and hopefully we can meet up there. I'm going to be doing some really fun panels, so stay tuned.
Also check out SFF Addicts
And SFF Addicts.
SFF Addicts Pod. Both of us are on here. Yeah. We both forgot to pitch it.
I was actually going to say if Adrian
wait a minute. I was waiting for the
yeah. SFF Addicts Pod across the board. You can find us on any podcast app. We're video on Spotify, video on YouTube at FamFi Addict. We got new episodes every Tuesday. We're interviewing authors, doing writing master classes, so all kinds of fun stuff that'll help fuel your writing journey, but also kind of connect you with the authors that you are all fans of. So yeah, we got some really cool episodes coming up soon as well. So stay tuned.
Nice. Thank you again, guys. I will have links to everything they mentioned if you're catching the playback in the description below. So again, check them out. Thanks for everybody for stopping by today. And again, thank you guys for coming on the channel.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Christopher.
Thanks for
having
the
us.
invite.
Thank
This
you,
was so
everyone.
fun.
Popcorn.
Popcorn.
Kernels.